and welcome to the second ever Power Gamer Extra Life. So I guess this is episode 2 of Extra Life. Today we're going to be talking about Ghostwire Tokyo, and I have one of my favorite streamers and just all-around great person joining me today, and that is Mikiran. So,
hi.
Mikiran, welcome in. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you. I am super excited to talk about Ghostwire because I don't know many people to talk about it to. Because
I know you and I both have a huge network of people that play games, and it seemed like for whatever reason, you were the only other person I knew that got into this game, and I think we're both in the same boat where we're kind of confused by that.
Yes,
because it's such a damn good game.
I know 3 people, and 2 of them have not finished it yet.
Man, so just for those that are, I guess, more used to listening to me and another guy that looks just like me,
it's true.
we used to work at Guitar Center together. We often would get the "Are you guys related?" thing. Like, we're like, no.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
I guess a little bit for those that aren't familiar with you, I guess what is your background? Where can people find you? Little bit, I guess, about throw you under the bus here to get started, but where's the best places where people can find you and sort of what you're about?
Well, I am a full-time content creator. I stream over on twitch.tv. I stream live, and I am a variety streamer, so I stream, I don't know, if I like a game, I'll stream it. I, for the most part, will end up holding off on games and keeping them in my backlog because I love streaming them. That's what I'm doing with Red Dead Redemption right now. And yeah, I am mostly over on Twitch. I'm on TikTok. I basically post clips over there. I also have a YouTube. I'm also a graphic designer, so I do that on the side. And yeah, that's about it. And I'm just kind of me.
Well, you're pretty easy to find because it seems like universally, and I'll spell this out for anyone taking mental notes. You can basically find Mikiran under that alias in all these different places. So yeah. Mikiran.
Yeah, and Twitter. A lot of my socials are I am Mikiran. Because believe it or not, Mikiran was taken in some of them.
Really?
Yes. So some of them I am. Most of them, I think, like all of the regular socials, like Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, I am Mikiran. Twitch is just Mikiran, and then YouTube is Mikiran Plays.
Got it. So definitely, if you don't already, we've certainly talked about her some here on the show in the past, but now she's here with us, so you have zero fucking excuse to not go follow her channels and give her your support, you scallywags that listen to the show for free.
Scallywags.
Your support is all we ask in return for you being here. So please lend us your support, and please go find Mikiran out there on the interwebs. And follow her and give her all your support, please. So the main reason why we're here today, Ghostwire Tokyo.
Yes.
So this is sort of an interesting game just in general before we get into the meat of the game itself, in that this is one of those games that kind of got caught in that space where after Microsoft had purchased Bethesda, which is kind of where this game's parented from, is that this was already a committed title to be a not fully Sony exclusive, but more or less just not on Xbox exclusive, right. Which I thought was interesting when the game came out, is that, you know, it was locked to one console, even though the now owner of it owns the other console.
Yes. And
I almost have like this sneaking suspicion that maybe that had something to do with how much this game has flown under the radar. I think it's funny you say that, because I think you're right. I feel like that as well. And the other thing too is like Tango
they're not. I mean, look at Evil Within and Evil Within 2. Those were kind of under the radar too. Like, they're people who love them. Other people are like, oh, what game is this? Because they came out. They have a tendency of putting their games out at really bad times. And there's
yes, they do.
I mean, Ghostwire Tokyo came out at a terrible time. And along with that, I think the marketing isn't quite there. And so I think that, accompanied with that whole conspiracy, I think that kind of really does. I think that really did it in, because it's really amazing to me how many people came to my stream and said, wow, what game is this? It looks amazing. And I'm like, Ghostwire Tokyo. It's made by the people who did Evil Within 2, and it's an amazing game. And like, I never heard of this, is what I heard more times than not, which really honestly blew my mind. That really blew my mind, because it's so good. It's so good.
Well, it came out on such a strange day, because it was Ghostwire Tokyo, Kirby's Forgotten Land, and the Tiny Tina's, I guess, Borderlands-esque sequel game all came out on the same day. Tiny Tina's Wonderland. Yes. And I mean, without a doubt, of those 3 games that came out on that day, this is the best one. Easily.
Absolutely. I didn't play the Kirby game. I
got that one covered.
Really?
I played the Kirby game. You got Tiny Tina's covered.
I did Tiny Tina's.
So between the two of us,
we both agree that Ghostwire is the best out of all of those.
Easily.
100%.
So Ghostwire Tokyo, which now you can get relatively cheap. Like, I keep seeing it on sale for like $30-ish on PC and PS5 at this point. So definitely go snag a copy. Full disclosure, this episode is for the 5 other people who have played this game besides me and Mikiran.
Or the people people who are like, I'm okay with spoilers.
Yeah, if you like spoilers, we're about to get into it.
Oh, yeah.
So this is your forewarning. That is what we are doing. Hopefully we said enough that if you need to dip out now, that you have been entertained.
We understand.
So I'll leave it at please give Mikiran all your support and love out there on the internet, but we're about to get into some nasty spoilers. Oh, yeah. So here we go. Man, this game starts off with a whirlwind of stuff thrown at you all at once. And I definitely remember, like, within the first 10 minutes of the game, feeling a little overwhelmed, like, what in the actual hell is going on? The game sort of starts off and with this, like, crash style overhead view of some bad car accident. And kind of like, as the camera's zooming in, you realize that it's actually like the eyes of a spirit that's looking over the people on the ground. And that's kind of your first introduction to Akito and KK. KK is the spirit, and Akito is the person who you mostly see in the marketing and stuff as the character that you're playing as. So KK sees his body on the ground. He's looking for a soul to possess. And it's translating this to you just as he's floating in the air. And you're like, okay. So he goes into Akito and, I guess, possesses him. And all while this is going on, I guess there's a fog moving over Tokyo in on this sequence. So Akito gets up from this car accident, and that kind of famous imagery where half his face is sort of blotted out by the spirit possessing him. People see him and start freaking out and running away. But as they're running away, this giant fog comes in that's just straight up disappearing people out of their clothes.
Literally.
So this is how the game starts. As that's happening, this fellow in a Hanya mask, who the game just refers to as Hanya, comes on all the screens in Tokyo, delivering his message of salvation, where he's basically killing everyone in Tokyo, separating them from their earthly bodies into spirits. So 5 minutes in, the whole world is ending. Can you think back, Mickey, to, and it's so hard to think back to like when a game first began, but can you kind of think back to that and describe, like, were you able to put everything together when the game started, or what was kind of going through your head as this game sort of opened its doors and let you into the world for the first time?
I was honestly, I love when a game pulls me immediately in, because there are so many games that you kind of have this slow start and you're like, okay, you know, I'll keep going and see what happens. And this game immediately kind of pulled you into a what the fuck is happening mentality. Like, I literally was like, what the fuck is even going on? The fact that, you know, you see Akito with like half of his face, you know, swirling and dark, and you know that this spirit was looking for a dead body, and you immediately find out that Akito wasn't quite dead, and so this is a little bit of a problem for the spirit. And the imagery through the whole thing, you realize that he is most likely the last person who was spared through all of this. And it's like this moment of, what are you going to do when you realize everybody around you's gone? Not only that, but to realize everybody is gone, and then to also see a parade of yokai. It honestly, that immediately, I had goosebumps. I knew immediately that I was going to really, really be into that game. I knew it because of the imagery and the voice acting. I played it on English for people who...
Which this is something we did differently.
You played it Japanese with subtitles? I did,
yeah. And so I remember when I came into your stream and saw this the first time, it's like, whoa, it's so different.
Yeah, and
how was that?
The only reason I did it that way, and I'm doing the same thing with Ghost of Tsushima, is because I have people who, I understand people can't just sit there and watch my stream. There's a lot going on in life, and I'm a chronic lurker. I put on a stream and I work. And so I wanted people to be able to listen to the story and listen to what was happening without having to worry about reading subtitles. And so I was a little bit worried, because a lot of times voice acting gets lost in English translations, but they did an absolutely phenomenal job with it. Even Hanya's voice through the whole thing was just ghostly and gritty. And KK was this like sarcastic jokester, and Akito really genuinely portrayed just being so lost. And they did a really, really good job with the translation. I want to play it in Japanese because I think it would sound phenomenal. But yeah,
the tone of the translations is almost spot on, like to the Japanese, which I thought was really cool. Because when I came over into your stream and watched, I'm like, man, they sound just like, is it the same actors?
That's pretty cool.
The different language, because that's almost how it sounds. I don't know if that's true or not, but it definitely reading through the whole game. That would be damn well near impossible as a streamer to pull off, because some people are watching on their phones and they'd be like,
exactly.
Yeah, so I totally get that. Yeah, that's not really feasible. So right, you kind of hinted on something interesting that I missed, is that the connection between KK and Akito was a bit of a mishap for KK, because he was looking for somebody that's fully dead to possess and take over and fight Hanya with. So I thought one of the funniest things was that I forget what movie this reminded me of, but KK has like full control of one of his arms. And so like the arm goes up and goes out and kind of pulls him into a direction. Then Akito's like, pulls his arm back. So you had mentioned that like immediate parade of the yokai, and right out of that, it throws you down in the first person view and says, okay, here's your combat tutorial. And all these fucking super creepy guys with umbrellas, who the game will then refer to as rainwalkers. start coming after you. And the combat in this game, I thought, was one of the coolest things, even though it's a little bit rinse and repeat. It's really, really well done and never feels annoying. And it's a little bit slower paced for a first person shooter. Like, it's not like Doom paced. You know what I mean? It's a little slower and more methodical. There's a little bit more thought that goes into how you attack things, but it's all this mechanic that they call weaving. And you basically have like a straight shot weave that's you're 99% of the time what you're using, or at least it was for me. A wind one that sort of comes out like a shotgun, and then this fire one that's basically like a big fuck you bomb that you just throw on people is the best, but you can't do it super often. So combat in the game, it kind of clicked with me right away. What were your feelings with the combat in this game? It sort of throws it at you right away before you even get into exploration.
It throws it at you right away, and I enjoyed every ounce of the combat. It was really fun, especially once they started throwing talismans in, being able to stun and then throw down the other talisman that helps you to pull out their cores, and just being able to combine everything. I was a big wind user because you had the biggest pool of wind, the green one. Water, I barely used. That's the one that came out like in a long streak, but I felt like it was really short.
Yeah.
Fire, my favorite thing ever was to stun and then throw a firebomb, because they'd all be like, wow. And then you could like, because pulling that core out was the most satisfying feeling. I thought the combat was so satisfying and so fun. And did you play on PlayStation or PC? PlayStation, right?
I did
and
PS5,
so the haptic feedback on the controller was
fantastic.
Like, wow. Like that made it. And I tried to explain it to people. I'm like, oh, I wish you guys could like feel what this feels like, because you could literally feel the pressure from the toggle. It was so nice.
Well, what's cool too is like the vibrations in the wind and those streams of light that would connect you as you're pulling out the cores.
Amazing.
The movement of them would match the feedback that you'd feel in your hands. It's very difficult to describe. This is going to blow your mind. And I definitely know it is, because from watching you play it, I sort of get this bird's eye over you that you don't get with me because I don't stream. I never once, not once in the game, used a talisman. I got through the whole game without using a single talisman. I loved using the talismans. Now, granted, I didn't use the decoy, and I didn't use, like, I don't know what it was called, the one that you can like hide, like I don't even know what. I didn't use those. Yeah. But that stun talisman, and man, one of the most satisfying things was there was a moment. This was so fun. There was a moment where I threw down. It was in one of the fight scenes where you go into like a different realm and you have these waves. And I threw down the exposed talisman that helps you get all the cores. I threw it down and I ran away, and they all spawned in that talisman. And so immediately they were like, whoa, and I was like, yes. And I pulled all their cores, and I was like, that felt so good. The combat was honestly, and that's the thing, like, there's a lot of rinse and repeat, which it's really hard to do in an open world style game, because it was relatively open world. It's hard to do an open world style game that isn't repetitive. And that's, I think, what killed me was that was like one of the complaints I heard about it. But look at how many games there are that are so repetitive but still critically acclaimed. Assassin's Creed, Horizon Zero Dawn, like, that was the first name that came to my mind.
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed.
And so that killed me, because it was rinse and repeat in a lot of ways, but the cinematics in it, and just I went to school for game design as well, and so just the game design aspect of it and how well it was done, and the visuals and the voice acting, you put all of that together, and it's like having to do a few repetitive things is nothing compared to how fantastic the rest of the game was, like jumble it together in a ball, you know?
So ironically, I didn't use any of the talismans.
I still can't believe that. I can't believe
really
it.
didn't use them.
I feel like you missed out.
But I leaned. Maybe I did. I don't know. I leaned really hard and immediately maxed out the bow and arrow.
Which is interesting because I barely used it. Okay.
See, so here we go. So what was cool with the bow and arrow was even the big guys with the suitcases and the umbrella that were like really gritty and tough. Like if you were trying to use the wind on them, one arrow I could pull.
You're going to laugh at this. So I discovered that. Get a headshot, one arrow, headshot, they're down, right? Every time I fought one of them, I would forget. And here I am like, pew, pew, pew with the wind. And
take like 100 rounds with the wind.
Somebody in my chat would go, don't forget your bow and arrow. And so after the fight, I'd look over and go, oh, I totally forgot. Because I barely used it. So I love that we had like different play styles.
Yeah, we totally didn't play the game the same at all. My bow and arrow was cool. My best friend, which actually turned out to be a decent decision for a few aspects of the game.
Absolutely.
So it introduces us to combat, and then we're whisked away into what's quite literally the underworld, the space that connects the reality that we're in to the realm in which Hanya and his Faceless exist. And the cool thing with the underworld is it's not always this dark and gloomy place. It's very much more what we would consider a spirit realm, so to speak. It's not always dark and gloomy, and sometimes it looks just like reality. So we're whisked away, and we kind of learn that Akido's main driving force is, right away, is that he is trying to get to his sister who was in the hospital. She had some burns that she was recovering from, but she wasn't doing great. So he wanted to get to the hospital to see her and check in on her. So the whole merge happens between him and KK. All this shit goes down with the fog and the rainwalkers and the yokai. Hanya coming up on the TV screens and talking about the end of the world. All of this crazy shit's going down. And KK is urging Akido, we need to go stop Hanya now. And he says, no, before I can do anything else, I've got to go check on my sister. Well, wouldn't it figure that Akido's sister, Mari, is the key component to Hanya's evil plan?
It was
Here's
so
serendipitous. Here's how it all comes full circle. So you get to the hospital, you go into Mari's room, and immediately you're whisked back into that realm between that you described before. And in it, Hanya is standing over Mari and explains to Akido and KK that she is the conduit to his plan of freeing everyone's suffering by killing everyone because he's a maniac. And in the very anime moment, Akido does the no and charges forward to go after the guy who's much stronger. And Hanya just straight up punches through his fucking chest.
Little bit, yeah. Little bit.
So things aren't going off to a great start for our hero. He awakens laying in a field of flowers with KK, who's now himself standing over top of him. So this is where you see KK and interact with him the first time. And he explains that, look, if I leave you, you will actually die. We have to work together. And it seems like their plight now has merged now that Mari is part of Hanya's plan. And KK's whole purpose here is to try and stop Hanya. So our two heroes literally have intersected into one singular vessel to begin and finish now our intro of Ghostwire Tokyo. So this is just how that first 10 minutes goes. It's taken us much longer than 10 minutes.
Because it was so amazing, honestly. the first few minutes of meeting them is
how it
wow,
starts.
like just so amazing.
Yeah, it's a complete mindfuck. So I guess at this point it's probably the right time to talk about. We've talked about our protagonists, KK and Akito, but we haven't really touched on the big bads, the bad guys in this game, which it has a very clear division between the good guys and the bad guys. So the bad guys in this game, the one we've talked about so far is this guy named Hanya. Hanya, of course, is not typically someone's name. It is actually the style of mask that he's wearing. He's wearing a Hanya mask. But in Ghostwire Tokyo, his name is just Hanya. So Mickey, Hanya is sort of in a relatable and sullen plight where you learn that his whole motivation for the evil that he's causing is to actually try and undo a pain that he feels from the loss of a loved one. So he kind of has Thanos syndrome, where he's doing evil shit, but it comes from a place of love and concern. What were your thoughts on, I guess, Hanya as a character? Did you kind of pick up on that same thing where it's like, man, I really want to hate this guy, but then you kind of understand, as the love of a parent, that he would do anything to bring back the loved ones he's lost. Did you kind of pick up on those same feelings from him?
Yeah,
Or did you see him a different way?
I felt like he was so broken, and he was broken to the point where he was willing to break everything else in order to not feel so broken anymore. Break everything around me so that I can feel a little bit normal is kind of how I looked at him. And he just wasn't seeing that what he was doing was such a poor way of handling what he had gone through. It reminded me also of another game, which I don't want to give any spoilers for it, and I don't know if you've played it, but Beyond Two Souls. There was kind of that theme going on at one point. And I felt so bad, but at the same time, he was so twisted and so broken that I almost couldn't feel bad for him, because my thought process is we all go through stuff. Like you stop it, just stop. Like, what if we all handled things that way? That you can't do that. You can't just create mass devastation because you lost people and you're hurt,
Yeah, there's I guess in something I played recently where the same kind of thing happened in the game, which you may or may not have played.
It's on my list.
Traveler,
it's on my list.
Square Enix RPG. So all I'll say is there's a character in the game who ends up making a bad decision because of the grief in losing a loved one and trying to bring that person back. And that's really Hanya's main motivation is he lost his wife and his daughter, but he's really only concerned about bringing his wife back. In fact, Hanya and his daughter, they don't get along in this game. You kind of learn through the backstory and things that transpired before the start of the game is that his daughter, whose name is Erica, was actually trying to stop him from his plan to bring back her mother, Hanya's wife. And in trying to stop him, he actually uses her and kills her to bring back his wife. So when we say he will stop at no ends to solve this grief that he has over the loss of his wife, he kills his own daughter in this game.
Uses her body?
Yeah. So, and The faceless are these zealots who also wear masks. And the masks are also the names of the character from, I guess, a lore standpoint. So he has 3 of these like high-powered minions that all wear masks, sort of like Hanya does. And they're completely different from the yokai, they're the rainwalkers, and all the other spirits that you face in the game. In that each one of them is kind of a main character. Well, absolutely main character. But they also serve as the bosses of the game, is going through these faceless. So each one of them is pretty creepy looking.
They did a great job with them, yeah. They did.
So you learn that Hanya's wife is actually one of these spirits. And her name in this game is Okina, which I guess Okina is the style of mask that she wears in this game. So we've kind of said everything there is to say about her. We don't know much about her as a person. Rather, we know more about her as just being this motivation for Hanya. The next one is Yase Otoko, or Yase Otoko, I think is the right.
That's so okay. American. My friend, one of my mods was making fun of me for saying things wrong because he's a weeb. So.
Yep. So weebs will definitely pitchfork and riot me, but that's fine. What's interesting here is Yase Otoko is the body of KK, who is the spirit who's possessing you. So we're getting some rather Black Mirror-y sort of shit going on here. And then the final one, and this is the one that I was the most fascinated with, is Komamote. And she is revealed to be Erica, Hanya's daughter. And Erica really has a lot of underlying story in the game that you may or may not get when you play through the game. It's sort of this optional thing, learning a lot about Erica. Before you kind of go to the last mission of the game, it gives you this warning. Mickey, you might remember this, where it says there's these 3 quests that if you take this point, you can't do until you finish the game. Do you remember, did you do those quests before or at any point? And so they were the ones that really explain Erica's background. And I might lean on you a little bit here, because it could be a little bit fresher in your memory. Okay. If not, it's totally cool. But do you kind of remember, besides being Hanya's daughter, who Erica was and kind of what her deal was?
From what I gathered, wasn't she part of wasn't she involved with what was the other one's name? Renko and Ed?
Renko.
And KK.
Yep. Yeah, so they're kind of like the Ghostbusters gang, so to speak. But yeah, so she was hanging out with KK and Renko, and kind of became like so close to Renko that they considered each other sisters in the game. But she became obsessed with trying to stop her father, and through these kind of optional quests, you learn that she's learning to fight from KK, and she's begging him, please, take me and teach me how to fight. I want to stop my father. And then, of course, you ultimately learn that not only KK, but her and KK both fell to Hanya and lost their lives trying to fight him before the events of the game began. So each one of these faceless, rather fascinating. But the part that's unforgettable about them is when you have to fight these motherfuckers, because they are evil sons of bitches. So the first one you have to fight is KK, Yase Otoko. And he kind of like turns into like this big, weird werewolf looking troll monster thing that more or less has the abilities that you have, because it's KK fighting you.
Yes.
With KK's power. Super weird. I didn't have the easiest time with the bosses in this game. Do you recall that first encounter with KK where you kind of get sucked into that portal and then you have to fight this big,
I think my
weird,
fight
goofy troll
included a lot
thing?
of wait, what the fuck am I supposed to be wait, what happened? Wait, what am I supposed to be doing? Is this working? Am I hitting him? Is it working? Is that doing any damage? Literally, I think that was the span of my fight. And then once I kind of got the gist of it, I didn't really have that much trouble with any of the bosses. They weren't as hard as that Knack boss, I'll tell you that. But
oh god, the end boss of Knack is the biggest.
They were no Knack boss, but it was hard at first figuring out. I like how you kind of had to figure out what to do to kind of like get away from their abilities, and because you really didn't have this like super crazy double jump and like all these ways to really protect yourself, because you had your little shield, but that really only worked with, you know, with the rest of the yokai. It really didn't do much when these bosses were throwing these like massive beams at you, and like, you know, so it was fun figuring out what you had to do to overcome those bosses. And then once you figured it out, it wasn't rage inducing, which I actually really liked. I actually really liked that you could just fight them and win, you know?
Yeah, because I sort of figured out, I'm like, oh, when he's blue, I need to use the blue thing. When he's green, I should use the green thing.
It took me a little while, because I was like, wait, do I have to use opposite? If he's using water, should I use fire? Wait. Should I use wind? And it took me a minute, but I hated using the water, and so I literally wouldn't. I did not use the water that whole fight. I used fire and wind because I just did not like using the water, because I'm like, I have to get too close to him. Yeah, I like how I really liked every one of the fights. That was a fun fight. It was.
So once you kind of get in rhythm with Yasuo Toko and start kicking his ass, he does another one of those anime moves on you, and he punches you so goddamn hard it knocks KK out of your body. And I guess to boot, it knocks you out of the spirit realm, and he escapes. But then you are left
for the bow,
powerless,
and that's that's where you were lucky.
Except for the bows, thank God. So, but that first time, this time, which is the first time where you go from having all that muscle with KK and the weaving abilities. And you're just left with your bow at a rather low level, so you don't really have much going for you. And the only way that you can fight anything now that he's been knocked clean out of your body is with a bow that you only have, like, at this point in the game, 5 or 6 arrows for. So you're pretty much turned into a helpless bitch after doing all this awesome weaving fighting. And, you know, Mickey, one of the criticisms I did hear in reading other people's takes of this game were for the few sections where this occurs. Because this happens like 2 or 3 times over the course of the game. 2 times relate to a boss fight. But then 1 time, like, there's this really long stretch where you don't have KK. What did you think about those parts of the games? Did that sort of... Would you say you have that consensus opinion where, you know, some people said that they could have done without that, or did you like those parts of the games? What were your feelings about when you basically lost all of your powers?
It's funny you ask. So I have a friend who we only know each other through Facebook. And I had said that I was going to be playing Ghostwire Tokyo. And he said, let me know what you think when you're done. I'm really curious. I don't want to give you any spoilers. And I said, fine. So literally last week I tagged him and I said, I finally finished Ghostwire. And I think it's the most underrated game of 2022. And he said, I quit once you lost the powers. And I said, really? He's like, I never went back. Really? And I said, it's for a very short time at first. It happens a few times, but it's really not that long in comparison to the rest of the game. So keep going. And so I could see why it would dissuade people, because I feel like the powers are one of the most fun things in the game. The combat is so much fun, and it feels good, and I love leveling them up and piecing them together, like I said, with the talismans. And so to lose all of that and have to use a bow, I understand why they did it, because they wanted to add this little bit of a challenge to the game, I feel, and it was a good part of the story. Like, this is what happens if you're not with KK, and I get it. Do I think it was necessary? Maybe once. I didn't like that they did it multiple times, because I felt like it was just unnecessary. Yeah, I think if they would have done it
3 times
once,
was a bit much. Yeah.
And you have to face these challenges of like, whoa, like, what am I going to do? I don't have my powers. I think that would have been great. I do think it shouldn't have been. I felt like it was a little bit of overkill that they did it more than once.
Ironically, the one I thought was the most annoying was the third time that it happened. And like, it was a good like 30 minutes of playtime where you had nothing, so to speak. And that was, that was kind of towards the end of the game. Because this first one here, so Ghostwire Tokyo, he just kicks your ass all over the place, knocks KK out of you. But then like 10, 15 minutes later, you've got KK back, and as you're playing through the story, and all is well again. Until you get to my absolute favorite part of the game. And that is when you have your first encounter with Komamote, who of course is Erica, who we spoke about just a minute ago. Her boss fight is to me, just the chef's kiss moment of the game. Right at the start of the fight with her, she looks like something from one of those like early 2000s Japanese horror movies. And like, she's this weird,
really cool
cat demon thing that's like all huge and creepy and pale and skin.
She was
just like
so cool,
a hairless cat
so cool
sort of
looking
thing. So she says hello to you by ripping KK out of your body for this boss fight. And so unlike a lot of the other encounters in the game where you're just spamming your attacks, this is a very tactical boss fight with Komamote, where like you have to sneak around the level.
Yeah.
And there was like these ducks in the middle. I don't know. I didn't see everyone that I watched play the game.
I lived in those
find
ducks.
the ducks that like kind of run through the center. But like, yeah, this thing's fucking terrifying. So giant creepy cat bitch is roaming around this kind of like square area.
I'd like go to get out of the vent, and I'd go whoop, and I'd sneak right back in again because she'd turn around. I'm like, no thanks. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, if she got a hold of you, you were fucking done. Like, so the way like this boss fight would play is she's got all these tails. I think 3 tails, and you'd only have the bow and arrow because KK's gone. So, I don't think you did have your talismans, which I didn't.
I don't remember, but I don't think so, because the talismans really didn't work on bosses anyway.
Yeah, so I would just pop out of the vent, go Aloy on her with the bow and arrow, and then she'd get all pissed and like start sprinting around the room, and I just hide in the center until she'd chill out. And
it was fun.
Yeah, it was
different.
It was the best boss fight in the game. Like, because even just figuring out what to do, like, okay, how do I hurt this thing after you get your like head chomped off a few times, and then realize, I need to be working on these tails in the back. So the Komamote fight, and I mean, just as a character, all in all, I think she was kind of the coolest character in the game. We learned the most about both sides of her. But then this boss fight, I thought was really well done. Did you have any major hangups with her, or was it sort of the same thing where once you realized what was going on with sniping at the tails?
It took me a minute to figure out. I literally had said, like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do against this thing? And at one point, I was coming out of the vent because I thought she was further away, but she was right there. And when I came out, I got the little notice to like push a button.
God.
And I was like, hold on. And I'm like, oh my God, it's her tail. And so I literally would like pop out, get her attention, like, hoo-hoo. And then when she came, I'd run back into the vent. And then when she run around like a lunatic, and then when she was running past, I would wink and pluck a tail and then go back under again. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and there's nothing else in the game that was really quite like that fight. So, that one was really cool, and I thought utilized well.
I think
the absence.
I think
of
that
power
could have been like the only moment.
Better than the
if
other
they would have made that the only
situations.
moment that you lose the powers, I think it would have been fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so too. I agree with that 100%. So I was there for your experience with the next one. And this is, of course, getting kind of close towards the end of the game. You fight Okina, who is Hanya's wife. And Okina is a giant fucking spider of hate. And she really kind of introduces some things that, again, weren't present at any other point in the game other than when you fight her. And she's got this unblockable attack. And it's very end boss of Elden Ring sort of thing, where she smacks the ground, these shockwaves start coming out. And the only thing you can do is either run around terrified, trying to find cover, trying to figure out how do I stop these things, or by some grace of moment of clarity in the middle of this calamity, you realize that I can jump over these,
Yes.
and there's stumps in the ground that I can stand on. Otherwise Okita was pretty straightforward,
Yes.
other than she was a goddamn bullet sponge. She was like a Destiny boss. I remember watching your time with Okina, but I will let you describe it in your own words, Mickey. How did
my
you fare
fight
with
consisted
Miss
of a
Okina?
lot of very high-pitched voice going, what the fuck? How the fuck are you supposed to get away from these fucking things on the wall? I think that was the majority of my fight with her. And then that moment of clarity, like you talked about, and I went, oh. And I was able to jump on. Sometimes I was able to jump on those stoops. When I wasn't able to, a flurry of curses flying out of my mouth. And then realizing, seeing that bright red under her chest and going, oh. And just being able to, and then there was a lot of
Right.
eating the food, because Akido is the loudest eater in any game I've ever encountered.
He's like Breath of the Wild Link.
He is like, I have misophonia, and I could
down.
never hang with him in real life. I could never go out to dinner with him in real life, not for a minute. So it was a lot of shoving food down my throat and trying to figure out, like trying to time the jumps, because it's not like you have this crazy jump. You literally jump like a person. Like, you don't jump like a superhero.
They're fast.
So fast.
Well, the shock
No
waves, they're not like these slow World of Warcraft waves. They're like goddamn speed of sound.
And I did not do
like
well
you have
with the
to
time.
It
I did not do
when
well.
She was smacking
I
the
cursed
ground.
a lot, but never raged, because literally all the fights felt so good. So there was never a moment of rage with it. It was a lot of trying to figure it out, and a lot of eating, and a lot of finally going, oh, and then that moment where you're like, wow, because you like the deaths were so cinematic and so fantastic, and they made you feel so good, because they're, in my opinion, especially as a streamer, I don't want to be sitting on a fight for an hour. You know, I want to continue my gameplay because I have people watching me, and plus as a streamer, sometimes you really feel like a doofus. And so the fights were just hard enough to give everybody that moment of yes, you know, when you finished, but not so hard that you're like, I think I want to switch to a different game. So it was, but man, those shockwaves were fast, and even jumping up on the pillars was hard sometimes, because it's like, that one's too high. I can't get up there. And that one's too far, and let me eat some food, and let me throw some stuff with my fingers. It was great, though. It was a really good fight. It was a fun fight.
Yeah, that one was really kind of pushed the boundaries of what could happen in a fight until we get to, and they sort of like, the boss fights are honestly like one of the best parts of this game. So, of course, that first fight with Yasuo Toko, he gets away, but then naturally, as you're completing the game, you've got to fight him again. And this one is personal because it is KK. So dude comes back. He basically looks the same. I mean, he does. He looks absolutely the same as before. Other than this time, he has these big shields that you have to take down. But fortunately, it was like the exact same mechanic as before, where you just had to do the color matching. And after Okina, I thought he was really fucking easy. I didn't struggle with Yasuo Toko at all. I think I one-shotted him, like my first time in there. But then Hanya happens. And Hanya is one of the biggest sons of bitches I've ever fought in a video game, period. Because he was really like a combination of everyone else that you fought before. He had the tails, like in these tendrils coming off his head, that was sort of like Komamote. He had the size and bullet sponginess of Okina, and he also had the wave attacks, even though they're a little bit different. Definitely. I thought they were a little bit easier to deal with. And then he would just send waves and waves of fucking enemies to come swat you down every time you did a rip on him. And I think it took me a few times to finally put all the pieces together to get down Hanya. And I thought he was probably the second best boss in the game. Still, that was still like cool. The fear of hiding from Komamote, I thought was the best. But how did you fare with? I didn't get to see your fight with Hanya because some scallywag called me at my work and pulled me away. But how did you do with Hanya? Was that a little bit more straightforward for you, or was it sort of like what I had, where just the amount of shit going on?
It was pretty straightforward for me. Pretty tough. Again, stun talisman. One of my best friends. Stun talisman, exposed talisman.
Waves of enemies.
The thing that got me was I have this bizarre, every game I play, if there's something chasing me, if there's something right behind me, I suffer. I struggle. I hyperventilate a little bit. And man, he was so like, I'd be trying to get away from him, and I could hear him behind, like right behind me. And I was literally going, he's behind me, because you can, like, the controller's vibrating, and you could hear you could feel it. And so that was the hardest thing, was like finding a good spot, and then really understanding, like, oh, okay, I just have to destroy those masks, and then a wave is going to come. And I found him pretty straightforward. It was just a lot being thrown at you, but was also pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you get like the busting the masks on the ends of the tendrils is sort of the key to the fight, then it becomes a lot more manageable to get through. The only other characters we really haven't discussed, we talked about Erica, who was, of course, Hanya's daughter. There's two other characters in the game that you spend a lot of time talking to, and that's Renko and Ed. Renko was sort of your partner in the story that takes place before the game, so to speak, before everyone is dead. Renko is KK's partner in trying to stop Hanya's evil plans, and they have a cohort as well named Ed, who's sort of like their tech friend. Renko is sort of an interesting character in the game. You spend a lot of time dealing with her. It kind of almost feels like KK and her like almost have like a sibling sort of rivalry with one another, and then like Akado's sort of caught in the middle where he seems like drawn and trying to help Renko and be really nice to her, even though her and KK bicker a lot. And she plays a large role in the game because not only just being KK's partner and kind of being the, I guess, smarter of the two of them. Yeah. She's also definitely a lot more technically savvy, and she kind of plays like the role of the guy behind the computer, like in Spider-Man Homecoming. I'm the guy right behind the computer. She's sort of that to the whole operation. But what was interesting with Renko is she's also trying, her whole motivation in the game is to try and put behind the guilt that she feels about losing Erica to Hanya. As we kind of described earlier, they almost had formed this relationship. Well, not almost. They formed a relationship where they looked at each other as sisters. So Renko is sort of a complicated character, and you don't really get all the meat of that relationship until those optional side quests.
I do too. Yeah.
I almost feel like they shouldn't have been optional because they were so key. They're so key to understanding what was going on. But yeah, Renko is somebody who is torn with grief, and kind of before the game wraps up, fortunately, you get this moment to talk to her, kind of right before you approach the end of the game. I don't know if Mickey, if you recall that interaction with her, where it's right after the whole bike thing, and she's kind of like sitting on the ground, and it's before you go up the Tokyo Tower. Do you remember that interaction with Renko? Kind of her last moments, and maybe if you can describe any of that.
It was
kind of what was going on.
There was the feeling I got anyway, like based on the story and what she had said. She felt like she had just failed, so much regret and so much of I could have done things differently and a lot of like what ifs. I think that's what so much of the game was like in terms of them, especially as we get to the end, which we'll talk about. Akido had what ifs and KK had what ifs and Renko had some serious what ifs when it came to Erika, and the fact that she couldn't save her from Hanya. And it was really sad. It was really sad.
Right. And if you skip over those kind of three quests, you don't get any closure with Renko. You only get the closure with her if you do those quests, and she sort of learns through you doing them in a very interesting way that she doesn't have to feel the regret, and she can pass on easily. So I think that might actually be a point in the game where if you don't do them, you might see something different than somebody who does. I haven't talked to enough people that have played through it to really validate. It was nice being able to see her
get to the point where she was like, I can go, I can be free, because that was such a hard thing. It was such a hard thing. She lived with so much, like this big weight on her back,
Well, the kind of juxtaposition there with Erika as a character is that Renko is held up crossing over because of her guilt over losing Erika, and Hanya her father just straight kills her as a means to an end to bring back his wife. So two of the main characters complete Erica's the most interesting character in the game, in my opinion, because she's sort of caught between the antagonist's plot, and one of the main characters' purpose for even being present is that guilt. So, Renko and Erica, folks, when you play through the game, hopefully anyone listening has played through the game at this point, but curious to hear any thoughts on any of y'all's takes with Renko and Erica, because I do think that was kind of the neatest relationship that they built in the game. And then there's Ed. And Ed is fucking hilarious. Ed,
absolutely.
As far as I can tell, Ed's alive, hiding somewhere in the game. And he anticipates what people are going to say to him, and he records messages.
Yes.
So that when you ring him, he doesn't have to talk to you. And he has a message recorded that just tells you what you need to hear. Ed is sort of the technical genius of the crew. We haven't even touched on kind of one of the coolest things in the game, which is the world itself. And that's kind of where Ed's character comes alive, is in the world between all these big encounters with the Faceless and with Hanya in Tokyo. So kind of one of the core mechanics of the game is, as you're moving through the world, you'll see these spirits that you can trap to set free at the end of the game, so to speak. And you transmit them to Ed through this device that he's made.
That's how you dial.
On the payphones in Tokyo. So yeah, you dial all crazy like. But so you end up talking to Ed quite frequently, because every time you want to go do a dump of the souls that you've collected, he may or may not have something to say to you. It just depends on where you're at in the game. It depends on how many souls you've collected. I thought Ed was hilarious. And he's sort of just this running gag. He's sort of like, God, dating myself here. You'll get this reference. He's sort of like in Home Improvement. You know what I'm talking about?
He's like that little side act. Yeah.
He's that. Yeah. And
yep.
So anytime you pick up the phone, he may or may not have something quippy to say to you, or you just don't know. But I spent so much time in this game just exploring the city and collecting the souls and collecting just all sorts of shit. There's so much stuff to collect in this game. And I kind of want to leave it, from my experience, at least, at that. But Mickey, how sucked in did you get to just all the distractions from the story? You know, this great city and all these collectibles.
So as a streamer, it's tough.
Did you really lean into that part of the game,
you know, going around and collecting souls and finding Tanuki it's not exactly the most thrilling of gameplay. So it was tough, but there was a lot of, especially when I finished the game, I was like, guys, let's just, for the rest of the stream, let's just go around and like see if we can find some Tanuki and some Jizo statues. And like, oh my God, they were so cute. The fact that like, they were always so surprised when you found them, even though this humongous tail is wagging and you find them and they're like, whoa, how did you spot me? It's like the cutest thing. It was a really cool little thing they added. It was amazing. When I finally got to the halfway point with souls, I was like, yes, like it felt so good. But the other part of me was like, I can never get the rest of these. It's so much. And I still haven't gone back to get them all, because obviously like I have to continue gaming. It's a massive task. Yeah.
It's a huge task.
Yep.
Like
I love
the amount
finding
of
one of my favorite things
in the game
about
is absurd.
Collecting things. The fact that all the little relics you find are literally from lore, from history. There are bits and pieces of, you know, whether it's lore from, the stories that you hear about yokai, or even little things like a shoe or a little figurine. I loved that you could go in and read about it, and they were actual things. Like, there's just not these made up things that the game devs made up. They were literally pieces of like history and lore, and I think that's one of the things I loved about finding collectibles in that game.
Yeah, and one of the parts I liked too was there's the little vendor stands, which, by the way, folks, if you
cats
like
and Shiba Inus,
this is the game for you. It's not Stray, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ghostwire Tokyo.
Absolutely,
has you covered on your feline needs, because every shop you go in is run by a floating kitty cat that makes really cute sounds. But so there's the store cats, and then there's these cats that are looking for items that are hidden about the city. And if you bring them the items, they give you different cosmetics and just fun stuff to play with in the game.
Oh my gosh.
I got so hooked on looking for their things. For two reasons. One is because those cats would act as fast travel points. So if you found them, you could fast travel. You didn't just have to rely on the gates,
right?
Which was sort of like the Assassin's Creed mechanic of the game, the gates that you had to open and unlock. But if you found these cat stands where they're looking for goods, you could ask them to track all the things that they were looking for, and it'd put little spots in your map for you to hunt. And Mickey, I must have spent like fucking 10 hours chasing down all of this shit for the cats. Cause like, I'll get this bug up my ass when I play a game like this. Like, I'm going to 100% this game. And then like, I'll get to like 80% and be like, what am I doing? Like, what do I actually care? And like, I had that with this game, and I was going so hard in the paint for like a week, chasing around, getting all these collectibles. So, yeah, guys, if you're the type of person that likes collecting everything,
it's a fun game to 100%. I haven't done it yet, but there's a reason I haven't uninstalled it yet either. Because I do. I want to. I have this itch to get in there, and yeah, super chill, super chill.
What's a kind of chill game you can just pop in and relax and play? A few more things I wanted to touch on here. One was just the movement of your character. It was sort of like a hybrid between, and I know you've played this game as well, the parkour like aspect of Dying Light, and the climbing from that game, very similar. But one of the things I wasn't really expecting was the flight that your character can do. It's sort of like gliding. It's
horizontal until you let go of the button, and then you kind of.
But it's very horizontal. You know what I mean? Fun. It's not like. Yeah. So like, you're like fucking Superman flying rooftop to rooftop. I thought the movement was one of the best parts of this game. And I mean, obviously, it's not something you get a lot of legwork with, pun intended, in the combat of the game. But, I'd say like 80% of the game is just moving around the city. And I don't know, agree, disagree. The movement was
one
sort
of my
the
favorite
star
points was getting, and I literally saved up my Magatama to get to where I could spawn what were the flying things called that were on the buildings? Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah, the bird things.
You know those bird things,
super
that
American.
you were able to grab onto.
Hey man, you know them bird things up there on the ceiling.
Oh, they started with a T as well.
I got it.
So I loved Tengu. Thank you.
Oh goodness.
Thank you. So
think of it.
One of my favorite things was when you were able to summon Tengu, and you were able to like shoom and like grapple up to him and go up to the rooftop, and then it was so fun and so fluid and it just added a whole different dimension to the game. It was really cool.
And kind of running through the world, I mean, we talked about the bosses, and we'll loop back around and talk about the end here in a second. But the other kind of thing in the world is, besides all the collection and the cool movement and the flying and everything, and collecting the souls and adding the phones, so much going on. But then you have the yokai that are very much part of the world too. And what's really cool with the yokai in this game is they're all so different from one another. And we don't have to talk about all of them, because some of them were kind of generic, like the rainwalkers. They just walk at you and have the umbrella. But there was one in particular for me just fucking drove me insane. And it might not be the one that you're thinking of, because I'd say a lot of people would get really messed up by what was the one, the lady with the mask. She wore all white and had the claws and shit.
Yeah.
I think it was like Shiramuku or something like that. But the one that messed me up always, every time I had to fight them, were these little things called shine dancers. And they kind of look like those old Halloween decorations.
They were.
Where like it had the styrofoam ball.
So there were two different ones, like, I think there were. There were the
white cloth over it.
Right. And then there were ones that kind of giggled.
There was these easy ones that you could kill in like 2 shots. But then
they were so
That's
hard.
The shine dancers.
They were so difficult.
They were the
worst. I think the worst thing
worst.
about them was because they came up out of a puddle, basically. And so unless you used your tear, right, or as my viewers were calling it, orange juice, unless you used it, you couldn't see the puddles. And so you'd be walking and all of a sudden you'd hear like this giggle, and it would come up and you're like, no, because they were so hard. They were so difficult. Yep.
God, man. They're fucking terrifying. Yeah, the other ones that were rough. It's not the Shiramuku. You fight her like twice. It's the Kuchisake, and it's this woman in like a white brimmed hat,
the crimson,
with a face mask on. There's 2 versions of her. There's this version that wears red, and there's this other one.
When they ran, that's why
the crimson one.
Stun Talisman.
Holy shit, they were rough.
So with the Stun Talisman, I would throw it down, and it would stun her, and I'd be like, oh, thank goodness. I'd hit her with a fireball, but then the minute you hit her, she's not stunned anymore. It doesn't matter if your talisman's still there. And she would come running at you, running full force. And it was like, she was fast, and she just wanted you dead. She wanted you dead.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. She was amazing.
She was just punching in one-way tickets.
The look of her was like, wow, beautiful.
Well, there was
Yep.
Probably the most iconic in the game, yeah. But I mean, there was a couple fights where there was like 3 of them you had to deal with at once, like 2 or 3 of them, and that was just. That's where I was really thankful for the bow and arrow.
Yeah,
is because like 5 shots gone, so worked out well that I had that. The other yokai in the game, mostly cool, but it's like a lot of different variations of the guys with the umbrellas and like the school kids and things.
Yeah. There was a yellow one and a red one. You had to sneak up or they would scream.
Yellow rain jackets,
and all of a sudden you'd have a bunch of different visitors. And I think what I loved most about the visitors was the lore behind them. I thought they were so creative because they literally took issues going on, like current issues going on in Tokyo. You know, the Rainwalkers were men who have been literally worked to death. And, you know, you have the ones who've been the ones who've been walked on and bullied. You have the ones in the raincoats were children who've been abused. Like the way they took the visitors and gave them this lure to signify things that are, you know, even like there were the ones with like the newspaper faces who wore like the pink sweaters and they were like, they'd blow kisses and they were fire, you know, big fireballs. They were
Yes.
visitors who had spawned from, like the negative interactions on social media, stuff like that. I loved how they took all of the real life issues and threw them into these visitors. I thought that was pretty cool. Oh, so cool. So cool.
Yeah, the paper dolls, they were called. They were one of the coolest in the game, yeah. So
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, anyone playing, I mean, the star of the game is really the city itself and all the different things that you can find. But in the essence of time, we've got to get to the end of the game here. So fast forward, or rather rewind back to when we were talking about defeating Hanya. So, of course, you defeat him. And I had said to you that I said to you before you got to the end of the game, I'm like, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the end of this game is like somebody dumped a bag of onions. My reaction to you was
seriously?
And just blew them all over you, sort of thing. And so the whole thing of this game is, of course, the juxtaposition of conflict of Hanya trying to bring back his wife and Akido trying to save his sister Mari. And in the end, I'm going to put this to you, Mickey. You sort of learn, or at least this was my take on it, that the two characters of Hanya and Akido, even though their way of going about things is completely different, that they're more or less on the exact same plight in this game. And really the breaking point is when I think you, as Akido, are faced with Mari's passing, that you almost have to learn fresh from everything you just did trying to stop Hanya, that even though it goes against your intuition and goes against your nature as a human being, that you ultimately do have to choose to let go versus holding on. And that's kind of what that aha moment that kind of hits you in the gut at the end of the game is it presents to you, you've defeated Hanya, but you think that you're saving Mari this whole time, but in reality, you're faced with her end as the game concludes. So, Mickey, I feel the onions brewing once again. Can you talk to us a little bit about? I
think the part that got me, and I
really
think the
tragic
most poignant,
end of
the
this
most
game.
Poignant part that I know spoke to me the most, and I would think spoke to a lot of people, was when Hanya and Aikido, they had the wall between them, and Aikido was trying to get to Mara and couldn't. And Hanya said, "Look at her. Why would you let her survive like this? Why are you keeping her like this?" And I was like, and Aikido too was like, wow, like, why? She's literally stuck in this state of constant pain and she can't survive. But he's trying and trying and trying to save her and blaming himself for everything. And it was like this little moment of why shouldn't I let her go? And then of course there's the awakening of, okay, I do have to let her go, but this isn't the way. I can't let him just have her, but I do have to let her go. And I think that was, it was such an awakening for him. And I found it amazing that the awakening came through somebody like Hanya. Even though he was trying to get his way and was manipulating Aikido, he was right. He was right. Like, you have to let her go. And in the end, it was his words that really put the fire under Aikido's ass to say, okay, fine, I have to let her go, but not your way. And it was really touching and beautiful. And it was nice getting to see Akito be able to let go. And it was nice getting the glimpse into their lives and why it was so hard for him to let her go, because they lost their parents, and the whole reason she suffered these burns was because she just wanted to hold on. She couldn't let go of these little trinkets, that her parents had left behind. And that's what got her put into the hospital, was not letting go, and so to see it all kind of come full circle into a moment of you have to let go was really beautiful and really poignant. And God damn, did I cry. I was not when I started Ghostwire Tokyo, I was not expecting, it doesn't look like a game you would cry from, but man, it was the way they did it and the acting and the voices and knowing that KK was going, and you put it all together, and it was hard. It was hard because it's like anybody who's had to let go of somebody, you felt it. You felt that letting go.
Exactly. I mean, it hit you just as strong.
Yes.
Because the amount of time that you spend with the characters of the game. And so first you have to deal with Renko, and that's tough. And then you have to deal with KK, who, I mean, he has his own bag of worms with his family. And kind of like you were alluding to with some of the yokai, is he's the obsessed with work male that was never home for his kids and had a bad relationship with his children because he was so obsessed with his work. And, he basically just wants them to know that he cared about them. And that's how he's able to move on. And then, the juxtaposition between Akito and Mari versus Hanya and his wife.
Yes.
Where you see through him someone who can't let go and where that obsession leads to. But then also just the resolution, I hate to put it this way, but it feels the way the game resolved itself between you and your sister Mari, who, you as the player, you sort of end up embodying the quest of the character that you're playing as, and like your whole driving force for all these hours of gameplay is to try and save your sister, just to come to the realization that, it's like having to make that hard decision, like as a pet owner, like when the time comes and you're like, you have to choose to, like, nothing's fucking harder. Like there's just nothing is harder than that. And it puts you in that same emotional place. And like, God damn it, I've never had a game put my mind in that space. And I mean, Ghostwire and Mickey, I mean, your explanation of it was an absolute home run, like just knocked out of the park. That's exactly what it was. And it's one of the toughest endings to digest in the game, but sort of like that feeling when those situations come up in real life is once you swallow that pill, you feel so much better. And this game really had that moment where once you see Akito kind of go, okay, you know what? And you see him swallow that kind of that pill, you immediately feel better. And you get to the credits and you kind of feel like that weight is lifted off your shoulder because you're right. Mari's severely burned. She's basically a vegetable.
Yep.
What kind of life are you fighting for her to hang on to?
I had to make the choice.
I don't want to be strung on like that. I had
to make that choice for my dad, and
in a hospital bed. No, just.
I mean, it's so to be, and it sounds crazy. Like for people who aren't gamers and who don't get involved in games, who don't get emotionally involved in games. I do. I love games, and if anybody's watched my Detroit Evil playthrough, I literally sink myself into games.
Oh my gosh.
that moment of you have to let go, it kind of like all came back, because it was that moment of, okay, I have to do this because it's time to stop being selfish. You can't be selfish. You have to let things go. You have to be selfless and say this is better for you. And we do it for our pets, and some of us have had to do it for loved ones. I just did it for Peter recently. You know, Peter. You know, I had to do it for Peter the
Yes,
Puggle, you know.
That old son of a bitch.
I had to do it for Peter. I had to say
Peter
it's time to let go, you know. And so
ladies and gentlemen,
to have a game, I personally love when games are able to pull something like that in, because it really is reminiscent of just life. And you get to live this fantastical moment, these fantastical moments of like shooting wind out of your fingertips and talking to cats and like Shiba Inus and all these cool things. And then you have this dose of life lesson, you know, and I personally love that. You know, I love that about the game. I thought it was amazing. Okay.
So, and I didn't put this in our notes intentionally because I didn't want to spoil this final thought.
Okay.
And it's regarding a game that both you and I played. And I always try and do comparables, like when I sit and play games. And I was able to actually think of, in terms of story and how the game made me feel, the game that I thought was most comparable to Ghostwire Tokyo. It's a game both you and I have played recently, in fact. And I was able to draw a lot of similarities in this game, you know, between Hanya and his wife and between Akito and Mari, as I was in Hellblade. And it's as soon as I said it, like, you know, it's sort of that, because Hellblade is that whole plight of having to let go, and quite literally at the end of
if you haven't played Hellblade, like you,
full spoilers for anybody that
it's not for everybody.
Hellblade,
I know so many people who got
Hellblade, what the fuck
through some of it and they said it's too much. It's heavy. It's a heavy game. Heavy game.
It's tough. So
I have goosebumps, by the way.
At the end of Hellblade, I mean, really the whole story of that game is about letting go. Yeah, I got you. I mean, the whole game is basically a, some may theorize that it takes place in Senua's mind, which I'm kind of that mindset. It's her dealing with the grief of her dead beloved husband and that's all the game is. And finally at the end, when she's face to face with Hela and she just hears the words in that long, endless sequence of combat. I'm covered in
goosebumps right now.
You hear those voices in her head just saying, let go, let go, let go. And you have the visualization where the head is dropped by Hela, and then when the camera pans back up, you see Senua. So I thought in a lot of ways, that sort of visualization reminded me a lot of Hanya and Akito, where Hanya was sort of the Hela
one of the things about Hellblade,
was sort of the
ending
Senua in that
was so much about letting go and at the same time accepting who you are. Like at that moment, Senua literally had to accept the fact that she has psychosis. This is me. And all the times that she had been shunned and pushed away and, you know, by her own people, she had that moment of, but this is who I am. And so I have to accept that this is who I am. And it's very similar to what happened in Ghostwire, because Renko had to like accept, you know,
well, here's another one, right? Yeah, I really thought about this. There's so many parallels. Senua's father in Hellblade sold them out. Like if you do all the relics, you learn that the reason why the Vikings came to that village is because he sold out the Picts to try and save his own skin. similar fashion, Hanya kills Erica to try and bring back his wife to save her.
Such a different way.
Like, there's a lot of
way.
parallels between those two games. And I mean, they're presented in such a different way from one another. But, you know, people, if you enjoyed the depth and the thickness of Hellblade, I'm telling you, me and Mickey are both here telling you that Ghostwire Tokyo has that same.
I think what throws it off is that it doesn't look like something that would have
really
that
worth,
sort of depth. You know,
really worth checking out. So,
yeah. The sarcasm, you know, the sarcasm of KK,
you have
and,
like the bright lights of the city,
but it's deep
of the weaving and things. Oh yeah, yeah. It's just it's delivered totally different. So, that about wraps up our spoiler cast of Ghostwire Tokyo. Mickey, I've got to ask you, any last thoughts here, or any final points you want to make?
I think we covered everything, and it's an amazing game, and I think everybody should really. It's underrated, and it came out at a bad time with poor advertisement, and I think it's absolutely worth playing. I do. I think a lot of people have overlooked it, and I think they need to not overlook it because it's a really beautiful game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's come out in a tough year, where not only did it come out on a bad point in time, but it also came out. We
had such a game drought, and there was nothing there. And then all of a sudden, this burst of amazing games came out, and Ghostwire came out in that burst. And I can't help but think that if it came out during the drought, that it would have been seen totally differently, you know. But yep. Yeah.
It needed to come out in a 100% year almost, because it's going to get swept under the rug. That's too. Right. I think when award season rolls around. So not on the Power Gamer podcast though. No way. I'm gonna be banging the drum of this one pretty hard. I think it's one of the best games of this year. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Again, big thanks to
I told you the quarry here tonight. I am so down to do this more often. I love this kind of stuff.
We might have to do this more often.
Love it.
You're pretty. You're natural at this. Well, big thanks to Mikiran, of course. I am demanding that you show your support to her on all different platforms. So please go find her either at Mikiran or I am Mikiran on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, etc. And give her your support, you scallywags. This content is free. So the least you can do is throw some support.
Thank you for having me
in our direction. So thank you so much for joining me, Mickey. And to all you listeners, I hope you enjoyed this spoiler cast. We'll be doing more of these undoubtedly
and I'm
in the future. So until next time, I'm Mike Dawson.